In today's video, we'll be looking at three African masks that can be found, all of them at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. So if you are in Montreal and you want to visit some museum, go check them out there. So today, the first one we're seeing is called Agbogo Mumyo mask. I apologize if I mispronounced that. The information for this mask that you see on screen is directly from the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts itself. And you'll be getting quite a little bit of information about this one there. Now, mask in African culture can symbolize different things for different tribes. Currently, there are 56 countries on the continent, but many, many different cultures and languages. So, when you say African mask, it can mean a whole bunch of different things to different people. Some masks are used for fertility, other for marriage, others for festivals, for good luck, etc. So it's sort of like saying somebody's Native American. It's one term to mean many, many things. So when you're going into a store that sells quote unquote African masks, try to inform yourself as to what tribe uses that mask and try to get more information, because when you look at this mask, it looks very nice and very pretty, but it could mean something particular. Could be there to also ward off evil or bring you good things in your life, etc. So you really want to look up the information and make sure you're buying the right mask for yourself. And we're going to take a moment to read together the description. So, although exclusively for men, the Miyo secret society used masks depicting women called Agbogo, Moyo, literally young girl's spirit, for their particular ceremonies during dry season or important funerals. Worn by initiates, the mask personified the presence of ancestors in choreographies similar to those in dances reserved for young women, but in an exaggerated form. The narrow face would have been accentuated by wearing a headdress and fitting, close fitting, very colorful costume. The facial features, hairstyles, and scarification represent an ideal beauty, a value, and indissociable from moral perfection. Among the Igbo, physical beauty is the expression of personal ethics. So, as you can see here, with this particular mask, a beautiful woman with scars on her face is extremely important. And that's why I was saying that it's important for you to understand why a mask looks the way it does, why it's shaped the way it does, etc. And to understand it's not the mask in of itself. That's important. As you heard, it also is included with costume and feathers, etc. So it's part of a whole costume, a whole ensemble look that you're going here with this mask. In the next part, I will go more into it. The mask seen here is used during an annual male-only performance, as I indicated earlier, by the Igbo tribe of Nigeria. This tribe is located in the northern part of the country. It is usually performed during the dry season and is usually accompanied by song and dance. The dance pays tribute to the maidens of the tribe, both alive and their ancestors. The masks have white, chalky skin and elaborate hair, designed based on the 19th century styles worn by the women of the time. What I really enjoy about this is that you essentially have these men pretending essentially to be women, and it is not sinful, it is not shameful, it is not looked upon as something that needs to be hidden. This is part of their culture, their tribal practices. It is part of what they do on a regular basis. Now, obviously, This may not be the same for all tribes in Africa. As I indicated before, there are 56 countries with multitudes of cultures, traditions, languages, etc. So for some, this might be looked upon as a bad thing, as something that shouldn't be done. And obviously, with the influence of the Western world, of other cultures, of other religions, obviously traditions will change. Maybe in 100 years from now, this is something that would not be practiced anymore. Who knows, right? But for now, this is something that is considered as part of the tribe. And as you can see, these masks, like you see in this one here, are all of wood. They're all brown. They're all very much connected to nature, to their daily lives. Um, they oftentimes don't make art that is separate from who they are as an individual person, separate from who they are as a culture, as a group, right? It is very much connected to their daily lives, to the land, to nature, to their gods or deity or whatever the case might be, right? It's all interwoven together. Everything is part of their life. Their life is part of their daily life. They don't look at it as a compartmentalized situation, right? Everything is part of each other in some way, shape, or form. So here we have a dance headdress, which is also from Nigeria. The information you see on the screen is from the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts as well. And it's going to be the same thing for the next piece as well. So, and for most of what I say is from these art reviews that you have is going to be from one of three museums most of the time: the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, the McCord Museum, or the Pointe à Carrière Museum. But I will try to specify, and I will try to make an effort of telling you guys when I'm just giving you guys my personal opinions. And if I'm adding information, it's usually from Wikipedia as well. So in the previous piece, the additional information I was talking about is from Wikipedia as well. So there's things in here that I learned and that I don't know personally. I don't know a whole lot about African history, but it's definitely enjoyable to learn as I'm teaching you guys and sharing the information I'm learning as well. So this piece, like the previous piece, is made out of wood mostly. There's other materials, as you can see, leather and rattan. And most of these pieces are fairly recent pieces. It's sort of like Inuit or Native American art, where a lot of these pieces are made on a regular basis because they're really meant to be used every day, right? These are not pieces that are meant to be archived, put away in a box, and forgotten about, only to be discovered a generation later or two generations later, whatever the case might be. These are items that are used on a regular basis, whether it's once a year, like we heard in the previous piece, for a dance ritual, or in a marriage, or in a death or funerary ceremony, whatever the case might be, right? These are pieces that are used regularly, so they're going to wear out, they're going to break, they're going to be lost or stolen or forgotten about, etc., which is a shame because it does mean that we hear in a lot of the books that we talk about, we hear a lot about these pieces without necessarily seeing them. So that's a major difference between a lot of the history in Africa or Native Americas versus Europe or Asia, where a lot of the times in European history, you'll have these pieces that are meant to be separate and something else, or they realized fairly early on that, hey, we need to have archival material, we need to keep things safe and separate, and really make sure that we're preserving our culture for future history to study and to archive and go through sociologically or otherwise, right? So nowadays, you do have more and more of that sense in Africa. There are, of course, museums there. There are archives there as well, and all that. But it's a hard sell. We tend to forget that there's a lot of countries in Africa that are going through wars right now. A lot of these countries also were relatively recently decolonized, right? For many of these countries, they got their independence in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, some maybe even later on. So, a lot of these practices of preserving their identity, their histories, is relatively recent. So, it's a hard sell. And there's also, of course, economic issues. Why would you worry about preserving history, making museums and all this stuff when your population is going through a war or going through a famine or there's a disease going out? Of course, COVID-19 was one of the more recent ones that we heard about, right? Where, of course, people are going to be much more worried about that than about museums, right? And even if you're not a believer in COVID, you'd think it was a hoax. A lot of money was spent on that. So a lot of people are not going to say, yeah, go ahead, on top of spending $1 million or $1 billion or whatever the sum was on COVID, go ahead and spend that money on artifact, on a painting, on a headdress, or whatever it is, right? So it's a very hard sell to convince people that, you know what, you need to preserve this, you need to keep this, you need to make sure that these things are documented and kept, and we can track where these things come from and show that the lineage of these artifacts and why it's important. And that's part of why I do these videos as well, is to show you guys that, hey, there are these interesting pieces that you can see for yourself, and to learn about whether it's your own culture, maybe somebody else's culture, whatever the case might be. And that's what I like about this particular section of the museum, is that there are going to be pieces here from a whole myriad of different cultures, different timelines. So you're not just focused on yourself and on your own world. You're learning about a whole bunch of different cultures and history. You're seeing things, yes, from recent times. Like I said, with this one, it's the 20th century, which is 1900s. So it sounds like it's far, far away, but I mean, a lot of you guys are in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, meaning this is about when you guys were around, right? So, it's important to remember, a lot of the things that we see in museums, they're not always meant to be far, far away, back when princesses were a thing, right? It's still meant to be something that you can see in your everyday life, right? For those of you who are African yourselves, maybe these are things that are part of your day to day life. You've seen festivals where they have these kinds of things. But by all means, for those of you who have seen these pieces for yourself being used day to day, if you want to share those stories, those videos with me, please do so. Or if you want to make videos of your own, go for it. I think it's always important to be able to share your culture and your history with other people, and to show that we're all different and the same at the same time, right? Because obviously, these types of headdresses are not unique to Africa. Africans aren't the only ones doing headdresses. Obviously, they're going to be looking different than that of people who are from other countries. I know there's many Asian cultures where they have different headdresses, they have different looks and rituals and festivals that are, the idea are the same, but they'll present it differently, right? Where you'll have ceremonies. This one in particular, for the previous headdress, was to honor their ancestors and the women in the tribes, right? Many Asian cultures do that as well, right? Where they have these festivals to honor their relatives, their family, and their culture. So, as much as we like to think that we're very different and very unique, in reality, we have the same ideas, but maybe presented differently. So we'll have one more piece to see, and then after that, it'll be the end of it. So hopefully, you guys are enjoying my commentary, enjoying what you're seeing. And obviously, we'll be talking a little bit more about this particular piece and the heritage of it. And I hope that you guys, like I said, are enjoying these videos. So, to speak a little bit more about this piece, the information I'm about to say is from Wikipedia itself. It is a piece from the Ijagam people, also known as the Ikoi people, who are found in the southeastern part of Nigeria and the southwest part of Cameroon. Their language is part of the Ikoid languages, but many can speak the official language of Nigeria, which is English. This tribe would traditionally make their villages around rivers to ensure access to water. Consequently, this allowed them to journey around the area and participate in trades with other villages and tribes. Notably, the Ibibio people came to the area as well as Portugal during the colonial era. Many of the Ikyo people there were brought to Cuba during the Atlantic slave trade or fled to avoid capture. Although men are responsible for hunting and participating in battles, both men and women participate in various cultural rituals and societies uh, that are separated by gender, however. Both men and women do weaving for their villages. Art is very important and detailed in the society and was brought to Cuba when the Ikoi people were brought to that area. Consequently, mythology and folklore are also highly developed, and they have a creation story, for example, that is similar to that of Adam and Eve. Here we have the last piece that I will be talking about in this video, which is another mask called the cone antelope mask. It can be found in Burkina Faso, north of Bobo Dioulasso. As you can see, this particular mask is supposed to represent an actual animal. So that's what you'll often find in Africa and African masks, that a lot of times they will represent either people, either the idea of people, ancestors in general, or a particular ancestor that you're trying to honor, or in this case, it will represent an animal which has significance and importance to the culture. So, as you can see here, the information is found from the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts itself, and you can read a little bit more about the animal and why it is important to this particular people. But I particularly like this mask. As you can see, it's very detailed, fairly large, and could potentially be much more colorful. You have a little bit of sense that there's a little bit of red on what would be called the muzzle of the animal, and a little other colors here and there. So you get the sense that you could technically color this in a little bit and make it brighter or more unique in that way as well. So this is really nice. I will be talking more about this in a moment. The Nuna, Winiama, and Bois are peoples found in Burkina Faso region of Africa. All three of these people have a rich religious and cultural history, which brings us these beautiful animal masks. These masks can in some part represent their farming ancestors and their link to the land, initially used during funerary rites of the common folks. The colors used vary from group to group, region to region. Even the eyes are different from male masks to female masks, children masks to adult masks. The masks are rarely worn alone in any of these cultures, often accompanied by detailed and elaborate costumes used during various ceremonies. Even the ceremonies themselves vary from one group to another as to their meaning, when they occur, and for how long. So, what I like with all three of these masks shown here is that they're all using very natural materials that are found in the land, found in the region. So, they're not things that are imported from other lands, from other peoples. It's really wood, earth, paints, etc., that are handmade, tooled locally, sourced locally. So it's also ironically very ecological as well, very green minded, environmental minded, even though that isn't the intention. Many African people still use these methods to these days to create these masks because it's the easiest, cheapest, and quickest way to make the masks that they want to make. That's also why that they're not, filled with gold and jewelry and very gaudy items. It's really tools and masks that are there to represent the everyday person. So that's the other wonderful thing about these masks is that these are masks that aren't about the kings and queens and the leaders and the people that are part of the 1%. It's oftentimes to represent everybody and all of our ancestors or the ancestors of the family or individual that's there, right? So it's really about everybody participating in the culture, in the history, and celebrating their connection to the land, to their ancestors, to their life in that particular village or country or the continent of Africa in general, right? Now, that of course doesn't mean that there aren't celebrations that are done for the leader or the king or the prince, etc. But it's not something that's exclusive to them. Everybody has the right to have some kind of celebration, some kind of ceremony, using some kind of mask, right? Even if it's just a wedding ceremony where a bride is looking for her husband or the other way around, right? So that's why you have a whole myriad of different ceremonies. And just because one kind of ceremony is not allowed for women in one village doesn't mean it's not occur in another village. So that's the other important thing to mention with these ceremonies is that you have a wide variety, and it's not because something is happening or not happening in one place doesn't mean that's the same thing everywhere. You have a diversity of culture, of religions, of beliefs on the continent of Africa. And yes, of course, we cannot deny that Western culture isn't influencing. There is a major influence of especially the American culture on African culture and history. We've seen, of course, in some of my videos, and mentioned briefly here, that colonization from Portugal, from England, from France, has, of course, affected as well the culture and ideology of many countries in Africa.